You must have heard of the phrase, trust your gut. It describes that deep, unshakable intuition you get when something is not quite right. A premonition, perhaps. A warning that sticks to you so tightly that you can't rest until you take its advice and get the hell out of there. Or not. Maybe you try and call its bluff. That's what 22-year-old Jyoti Singh did on the 16th of December 2012, when she and her friend Awindra Pratap Pandey uneasily boarded a bus headed for Dwarka at 9:30 p.m. that evening. They were returning home after a pleasant visit to the cinema in Saket when they boarded the bus with only 6 other people on board, all of them males. One of the men, a minor, had called out to them claiming the bus was headed to their destination.
"Where are you going, Didi?"
he asked the woman, using the colloquial Hindi for elder sister. The couple got in and sat down, falling for the ruse that the men posing as passengers had prepared.
"How long will it take?"
Pandey asked.
"Not too long,"
replied Ram Singh. They were charged 10 rupees each for their fare and boarded the bus. An uneasy silence pervading the air. The bus set out on its journey, but after a short period of time it deviated from its usual route. Doors locked tight. Jyoti's friend Awindra became suspicious and objected to this change of the bus's course. All of the passengers on the bus, including the driver, began to laugh ominously. They taunted the two of them, asking,
"Why are you both out so late tonight?"
A fight broke out between Awindra and the men as they all converged upon the two of them. Awindra was beaten, gagged, and knocked unconscious with an iron rod. The transgressors then dragged Jyoti to the rear of the bus. At the back of the bus, whilst the driver kept the vehicle moving, they began to scrabble at Jyoti's clothing. Jyoti fought back, biting 3 of her attackers and leaving marks on them. But it was no use. The sheer number of assailants against this young woman left her with no chance of escaping her awful fate. One by one they raped her. Medical reports later revealed severe injuries to Jyoti's abdomen, intestines, and genitals. Doctors noted that the damage suggested a blunt object, likely the iron rod that had been used to knock out Awindra, was used for penetration. The rod was later identified by police as a rusted L-shaped wheel jack handle. Can you imagine how helpless you would have felt in her situation? That agonizing feeling of no escape as a group of unknown entities forced themselves upon you, finding orgasmic pleasure in your sickening demise. The bus became a metal sarcophagus for Jyoti Singh. She was so close to help from the outside world, but no one could even hear her muffled screams as the bus continued to roll forward in the night. The darkened windows offered nobody a clear vision into what was happening within. The city of Delhi moved on with its usual chaos. No one knew about the horror that was happening in that bus. Despite everything, Jyoti was not going to let her attackers win easily. She fought back with every bit of strength she had left. Can you imagine the courage it took to bite 3 of them? She left marks on them. Those marks would later help tie the attackers to the crime. After the assault, the transgressors did something beyond cruel. They threw Jyoti and her friend out of the moving bus, dumping them on the side of the road as if they were nothing. They wanted them to die there, in the cold, alone. One of the attackers, thinking he could cover up their crime, tried to clean the bus. But no matter how hard he scrubbed, he could not get rid of the truth. DNA was left behind, clear evidence of what happened that night. While the attackers were cleaning the moving bus and getting away from the crime scene, Jyoti and her friend were barely holding up and waiting for death on the side of the road. Around 11 p.m., A passerby appeared on the same route. He was probably going about his business when he saw something. There, lying partially clothed and barely clinging to life, were Jyoti Singh and her friend. The gruesome scene on the road screamed of a brutality unimaginable. He did what anyone would. He called the Delhi police. And thus, the nightmare began. When Jyoti was rushed to Safdarjung Hospital, doctors were horrified. They were trained for emergencies, but nothing prepared them for this. The medical team found that she was hanging by a thread. There were numerous bite marks covering her body, telling the story of an assault so heinous that it defied reason. One of the attackers, in a shameless confession later, described something that would send chills down anyone's spine. He claimed to have witnessed what he thought was Jyoti's intestines being ripped out by another assailant. Let that sink in for a moment. Imagine the horror, the absolute inhumanity. And then, to confirm it all, they found the blood-stained metal rods, which had been used to cause unspeakable damage to her body. Her injuries were so severe that she had only 5% of her intestines left. Despite the efforts to save her, despite the prayers and the outpouring of support, Jyoti succumbed to her injuries on December 29th, 2012, in Singapore's Mount Elizabeth Hospital. The cause was reported to be sepsis from the multiple injuries inflicted on her body, which had led to organ failure. Sepsis was the slow poison that ravaged her system, while her body had already suffered more than most could endure. Before Jyoti passed away, she made one thing clear in her dying declaration. She said that she wanted justice. Justice for herself. Justice for every woman who has ever faced violence. And justice against the 6 men who stole her life. Ram Singh, Mukesh Singh, Akshay Thakur, Pawan Gupta, Vinay Sharma, and that juvenile. 6 names. 6 individuals who embodied cruelty in its rawest form. When the news of the assault broke, India exploded. And rightly so. The streets of New Delhi became the ground for huge protests, where thousands gathered, their anger visible, their frustration palpable. How could something like this happen in a country that prides itself on its rich culture, respect for women, and heritage? Yet here we were, facing one of the most brutal assaults in modern history. The protests started not just for Jyoti, but for every woman who has ever been silenced, assaulted, or left to suffer without justice. But you know what's ironic? Indian laws prevented Jyoti's real name from being published. Can you believe that? The woman who fought so fiercely was stripped of her identity, even in death. The world knew her as Nirbhaya, which means the fearless one. But she was more than that. She was Jyoti, a daughter, a friend, a student with dreams, and a woman who deserved better. All the accused were eventually arrested, but it didn't happen overnight. The morning after the attack, the police were already on high alert. They knew they had a brutal crime on their hands, and they needed to move fast. The bus, the same one used for the attack, was found the next day, and the police found out that it still had bloodstains and physical evidence inside. It is hard to imagine how the monsters thought they could just clean up the bus and get away with it. The evidence they left behind was enough to start connecting the dots. Ram Singh, who was the ringleader in this whole event, was arrested first. His name would later become infamous, not just for the crime, but for his mysterious death. On March 11th, 2013, Ram Singh was found dead in his jail cell. The official story was that he had committed suicide by hanging. But if you ask his family or his lawyers, They will tell you a different story. They alleged foul play, claiming there was no way he could have taken his own life. What really happened in that cell? We may never know. But what's clear is that one of the most dangerous men involved in the attack was gone before justice could fully catch up to him. The rest of the gang, Pawan Gupta, Vinay Sharma, Akshay Thakur, and Mukesh Singh, were not as lucky. These men had committed a crime so vile that there was no escaping the law. In September 2013, the court found them guilty of rape and murder, and 3 days later, they were sentenced to death. But even this was not the end of the story. Jyoti did not get her justice that day, or even in the coming 7 years. In India, death sentences don't always lead to immediate execution. Appeals and court delays can stretch for years. And boy, did these men try to escape their fate. They appealed their sentences again and again, hoping for some kind of miracle. But that miracle never came. The Delhi High Court upheld the death sentences in March 2014. And by December 2019, the Supreme Court of India rejected their final appeals. Finally, on March 20th, 2020, the 4 men were hanged. Justice had been served, but it took over 7 years. 7 years of trials, appeals, and delays. Can you imagine the agony Jyoti's family went through during this time? The constant waiting for justice, the reliving of that horrible night, every time the case was in the news. And then there was the juvenile, Mohammed Afroz. Now this is where things get even more frustrating. Despite being involved in the same horrific crime, he received a much lighter sentence. He was sent to a reform facility for 3 years. Yes, just 3 years. It is hard to wrap your head around how someone who took part in such brutality could get off with such a short sentence just because of his age. Age does not erase the cruelty of the crime, does it? And yet, that's how the law works sometimes. That was all for today's video. Before we go, I just want to take a moment to thank you for watching, for listening, and for caring. Just one last thing. Stay safe out there. Goodbye.